What does Jesus look like? Well, we know he doesn't look like that guy. You know, he's not a Norwegian or, heaven forbid, Swedish. I said that for you. No, we know he didn't look like that. Right? But we want to know what he looked like. When I would stay at my dad's house, I would sleep on the couch in the early morning hours. I'd wake up and I would be greeted with these two pictures on the wall. And one of them was this guy. But he was in a little bigger picture. He was in the Garden of Gethsemane with his hands, going like this. And the other picture was a bigger picture, 4 foot tall, wide. It was a picture of a velvet Elvis. And so I got the king of rock and roll, and I got the king of kings side by side. But to be honest with you, guess who looked more like the king of kings? Wasn't this guy. Looked more like Elvis. He was much more dynamic, right? And this guy looked like he could get some stuff done, but this guy... I wish we had a picture of Christ that matched his title, King of Kings. Well, we do, actually. It's a very overlooked picture that was meant for the church for all time. When we close our eyes and we imagine Jesus in his ascended state, this is the image that should come to mind. And not just that. Here it is. This is in the book of Revelation. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, "Write in a book what you see and send it to the 7 churches." 7 meaning completeness. This is the picture for churches for all time. Then I turned to see whose voice it was that spoke to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands I saw the human one. Talking about Jesus here. Clothed a long robe with a golden sash across his chest. His head and his hair were white like wool, white as snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined as in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. Anybody here been to Niagara Falls? And the noise, it just thunders. You can actually feel the ground shaking. And in his right hand he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he placed his right hand on me, saying, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and see, I am alive forever, and I have the keys." And this is the kind of guy you want with the keys. He looks the part, this Jesus. He fits this King of Kings when we see him, as the Bible describes him, in his ascended state. See, when Jesus walked the earth, he had the dimmer switch turned down. He doesn't have the dimmer switch turned down. It's turned up. This is how he really looks today. And that's the real question. Not what Jesus used to look like. What does he look like now? He's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And this Christ has eyes that are a flame of fire, and his face shines more brilliantly than the sun, and his hair is whiter than the whitest snow. You ever been driving and you get this, the light comes off the white and it's blinding? It's like snow blindness. Huh? So there's the whiteness of Jesus' hair and the brilliance of his face, and his eyes is reflecting off that light, and it goes right into your eyes. All of us would fall flat on our faces, and we would just faint if we saw Jesus with the dimmer switch turned up. The ground shakes under our feet. And more than that, when he speaks, it's like there's like a sword coming out of his mouth. He goes right to the heart, right to the thing we most need to hear. He cuts through all the BS that's all around us, and he goes right to it. Today we're going to look at what that word is that goes right to our heart. Is this how you see Jesus today? What does Jesus look like? And this picture that we've just described is meant to inspire the Church of Christ for all time. Again, uses 7 churches, language of completeness. The book of Revelation pictures Christ working inside the insanity of human history, bringing redemption to the human story. And it uses symbols like the book of Revelation. It uses symbols like dragons and Babylonian whores and the city that comes down out of the sky. I mean, this sounds like a Marvel movie. Huh? This sounds like Lord of the Rings. It uses these powerful images and symbols to wake us up to the story of Christ in the work of the craziness of human history. If you read Revelation correctly, folks, it tells us where hope is found. And it's not found in politics, and it's not found in religion. It's found in the guy whose face is like the sun, speaking into human history. It comes with the one with a sword coming out of his mouth. And so it begins with an image of the ascended Christ that inspires us with hope, because that's what it's meant. It's not meant to scare us. Well, maybe a little bit. It's meant to inspire us that Jesus looks the part. Because our world needs hope today. We need hope today in this crazy mixed up time. Jesus is the Lord of time, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, and he looks like it. It's meant to inspire the church for all time. Now, this does not mean that Jesus is the master over time. Because if Jesus is pulling the strings up there in heaven, he should be fired. Because he's not doing a very good job. Have you looked at history recently? Have you looked at what's going on in our world? The book of Revelation just describes just the insanity of human. Remember the 4 horsemen of apocalypse? That's in the book of Revelation. And there's this fiery red horse that comes out. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. Now, doesn't that human history? War and more wars. And there was a man by the name of John Newton, and John Newton was a slaver. He had his own slave ship. And so that's what he did. He transported slaves, and as you know, the conditions in slave ships were deplorable. And many of them died under just horrendous, tortuous conditions. And more than that, John Newton mocked God. And I thought, if Jesus was the Lord of history, he should take this guy out. Just get rid of him. If he's so powerful, Jesus, why don't you stop that? Do something. Jesus is not necessarily the master over time. It just means more that Jesus is the master inside of time. You see the difference? Like a balloon inside of a balloon. So there's John Newton. And a storm happens where he nearly lost his life. And then he remembers that his mom died at the age of 7. But she was a very devout woman. And he comes back to his faith. And he stops being a slaver. In fact, he begins to testify as a former slave ship owner how terrible it was. And his testimony, along with the work of William Wilberforce, together they overturned slavery in the British Empire. But more than that, John Newton I shouldn't say more than that. In addition to that, John Newton becomes a minister. And he writes this little hymn. You might have heard of it. It's only the most popular hymn ever written. Anybody know what it is? Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. How many lives have been touched by that song? How much better is human history because of that one song? This is Jesus, the master inside of time. Taking something ugly and making it into something beautiful. This is a story of redemption. This is what our Jesus does. He gets in our stories and he begins to redeem it. This is his true genius. The good news is not so much that Jesus is the master over time, but that Jesus is the master inside of time. And it might be hard to see in our mixed up world, but it's there working its magic. And the message of the book of Revelation is that magic will win the day eventually. Jesus is the master inside of time. And this master inside time, transforms us through grace. There's a saying that comes from AA. Expectations are premeditated resentments. In my previous life as a pastor, I was full of expectations, for the church. People should read the Bible more, they should church more. They should. But they don't like they should. And I found myself, you might not have seen it, but I felt it. What's wrong with these people? I began to have resentment toward the church. And you think that, eventually the people start to pick up on that. And then people weren't so happy, and some people started leaving, and then the church had some expectation. Isn't it the expectation, isn't the job of the pastor to keep everybody happy? And if he doesn't, well, maybe we need a new pastor. Expectations are premeditated resentments. You know what an expectation is? An expectation is a rule, and a rule is a law, and law is not grace. You see, the one whose eyes are full of fire is full of grace, not laws. The master of inside time transforms us through grace, like he did with John Newton. And so, we see Christ correctly when we put down should and we pick up something else. So how do you know if you know that you have expectations premeditated? You know when there's this thing that rises up in you called should. And should is an ugly word. A word is like a virus that makes us sick and all those around us sick with all of our expectations. People should. I should. Churches should. And we don't see the log in our own eye staring at the speck in everybody else's. And it blocks out grace and it divides people, all in the name of something that feels so righteous. We like that feeling, don't we? I know someone who was vacuuming a rug, and they're doing a great job on the rug. This is a true story. They're doing the rug, they're vacuuming the rug, and it's looking great out here. But what they didn't realize is there was a hole in the vacuum bag. So where's all that dust going? That's what our expectations are like. We're working, well, those people should, and everybody's choking on that, Premeditated resentments are floating in the air, like those fighting over politics and religion. So this Jesus, with a face more brighter than the sun, and whose voice rumbles, comes to us not with a should. That's just more of going to force people to do what they're supposed to do. And if they don't, I'm going to get mad at them. It doesn't work that way. He comes to us not with a should. He comes to us with if I can get it to stick. There we go. With wood. Wood is different than should. Would you, by faith, accept that God loves you without conditions or limits, like John Newton? Can you see grace blazing in his eyes? Can you see love shining on his face? Because that word will transform you more than all the shoulds. And if should would have worked by now, folks, it would have worked. It hasn't and it won't. Now, here's the truth. If anyone in Christendom should appreciate grace, it's Lutherans. Right? Lutherans, this is your thing. Would, not should. This is Luther's big thing. This is what it be. This is Luther's gift. This is the Lutheran gift to the world. It's not should, it's would. Would you receive by faith the grace that God has poured? And when you receive that, it changes you, and then you can go out and love your neighbor. And this is the thing. You Lutherans, us Lutherans, I shouldn't say you, because I'm one now too. Us Lutherans. And so when we come for communion, folks, this is not a should. Well, I should take communion. This is a would. Would you come and receive what God has offered you? Would you by faith be consumed with the transforming power of your absolute acceptance? And not just yours, but everybody else's. This is a transformative way of seeing the world. Not should. Not should.